Hello everyone, this is Shrikar here, and today we'll be building a simple application using the OpenAI's Assistant API. To begin with, what I wanted to build was a simple drive-through assistant for McDonald's, which has a knowledge about all the items that McDonald's provides, and essentially it will interact with the users to understand their order and also suggest them with new recommendations or new products that they can buy without being pushy. So let's see how the application works. We can start with very simple questions like, okay, can I get a Big Mac? The idea is the Assistant API is given, we are using the OpenAI's Retrieval plugin, which understands menu in this case, and it's going to like suggest other products that you can buy along with Big Mac, right? So in this case, it says, absolutely, you can have the Big Mac. And would you like to make it a meal with fries and drinks or just a Big Mac? So let's say I want to, let's add a medium fries. And also because it asks for the name, let's say I give my name. Picture Seeker, you have a Big Mice and anything else. So as you can see, right, it initially starts with a very simple response saying that, okay, these are the few recommendations you can buy. It asks for the name. Then once we add medium fries in this case, it's going to like suggest with any kind of like beverage you want. You can obviously add it if you want, or it'll say, no, I'm good. And it will say, okay, this is like the complete order, and it will kind of like reiterate, okay, whatever you have ordered till now, right? So this is the application we are going to build. So let's see how we can build it. So let's look at the code in detail. So there are three files: the Streamlit Assistant, assistants.py, and McDonald's menu. McDonald's menu I just scraped from their website. Assistants.py are all the helper functions I have written to talk to basically integrate with the OpenAI's Assistant API. Here you can think of like, let's say let's start with the creating an assistant. So in this case, you can think of an assistant as an application with certain instruction as well as a knowledge base. In this case, we are essentially providing this assistant the McDonald's menu that it can use for understanding the user's order as well as like recommending products. So to begin with, you can look at, I'm just like storing the assistant ID, which I created in a file so that I can use it for any conversation in the threads and the runs API. The first thing I do is essentially creating these files or like uploading the file so that OpenAI can use it during the application runtime. The second one is essentially creating an assistant itself. In this case, we are passing in the instructions. Let's look at the instructions. So as you can see, the instructions are like this. Let's say a role. As Mac helper, your primary role is to assist customers in choosing from McDonald's menu. And like you can prompt, this is like a regular instruction set. And the second thing which we tell is the name, which in this case, we are giving it like Mac helper as the application name. Third one is the model. Because I'm using Retrieval as a plugin, I'm just using the GPT-4 Turbo. And also in this case, the tools I'm using is the Retrieval tool, and file ID is the uploaded file ID. So the way it works is when you're creating an assistant, any kind of like knowledge base you upload, it has to be provided as file IDs to the assistants. That's essentially what I'm doing here. And these are like simple, like storing the assistant ID in a file and reading it for the next time. The second thing you can think of is like creating the thread. So creating the thread is essentially like starting a conversation with the assistant. So as you can see, this method takes two parameters. One is assistant ID, and the second one is the user input, right? And the first time you create a thread or a conversation, in our case, it creates a separate thread, which has like long-term history of all the conversation that has happened in the thread. And this create in thread run essentially calls a submit message, which is where we create the thread using the user's message with the role as user, along with the thread ID we have passed. And this is an interesting part, which we haven't looked at it before, is anytime you create a message, nothing happens. It has to be run, which is like executed in the context of the application as well as the thread. And that is essentially what is happening here, right? So you can think of three functions. One is create assistant. This is for creating your assistant. Second one is for creating a thread. And third one is for submitting a message or a user message and then running it, right? And there's also simple helper functions like get response, which essentially for a given thread ID, it just like gets all the messages in the thread in the ascending order, right? There is another function which is like wait and run. This is an interesting method. So as you know, previously, whenever we used to use chat completion API, we used to have a message and the OpenAI used to get back us with a single response. But in the assistance API, it can provide more than one response, right? Because of this, it essentially, whenever you create a thread and you try to run it, it goes from like queued state to in progress to completed, right? So if you submitted a message and you start pulling in information or like reading the response from the threads, it's quite possible that you might get partial output till the status becomes completed. As soon as the status becomes completed, you can be pretty sure that all the responses which the assistant wanted to give you is already in the thread, right? So this is like another helper function just for like making sure that you wait for all the messages or the responses from the assistant first, and then you can kind of like go on with your application logic. So these are the help functions. And the second thing we are going to look at is the main streamlet or the runner file. In this case, you ideally want to create an application or an assistant only once, right? In this case, because I was like kind of like testing it, I created an assistant and stored it in the session state. Session state is kind of like a session context which Steam provides us, and we can use that to essentially create the assistant only once. And any like further messages, you don't create the assistant again and again, because in Streamlit, one of the main flow is whenever you create a message, it actually runs the file again, the whole file again. So storing the assistant ID in the session state will make sure that we don't create an assistant again and again. This is a simple, again, messages like is an array for storing all the conversations that have happened till now. And in this case, I'm using the chat message UI from Streamlit, which will essentially provide you the kind of interface you are seeing here. And let's look at what actually happens within the user prompt. So as soon as when I say somebody say like, what would you like to order today? This is the first user message. I'm going to like update the message in the chat message. And then once if the thread is not in the session state, in my case, what it means that we haven't started a conversation and run is also not in the session state, we create the thread and run, right? So this is the first message or the conversation that gets started. And for subsequent threads and run, you want to make sure that you store the thread ID so that you can essentially maintain the state or the message history. One more thing you might have noticed is whenever we make a call to OpenAI, we never provide the prior history like we used to do with chat completion API, because the assistant APIs kind of like take care of that in the background. All it needs to know is the thread ID, right? So for every thread ID, it maintains all the conversation history and uses it for responding to the user. That's why I think that's why the main reason for us to store the thread and run. Basically, what I'm doing is waiting for the run to complete. And once the run is complete, you kind of like get back all the messages from the thread and then kind of like display. This is just like a simple displaying of the messages in the chat UI, nothing apart from that. And also, as you can see, I'm essentially just looking at the last assistant message for further kind of, if I wanted to do certain things on top of the assistant message, I could use that, right? So in this case, I'm just displaying it. But as you can see, I try to like generate some audio also here. I'll talk about this particular stuff in the future videos. But yeah, so that is essentially how the whole assistant API works. One main thing to note about the assistant API is how the tokens will be charged. Just because we are not passing the prior history or the conversation history doesn't mean that you will not be charged for that, because behind the scenes, the OpenAI is maintaining this thread or the conversation history, and it will be using that conversation history for responding to you. So please be aware of this. And that will be all for today. Thank you, folks. Do let me know if you have any feedback or any other questions. I'll be happy to help. Thank you.